All right, welcome to this week's live office hours. We're actually right on the money, maybe a few seconds late. Jumping around a lot. Okay, how's everything going, man?
Not too bad, not too bad. Just want to kick off and say anybody who was trying to chat in earlier, apologies. We did have a slight outage with our chat provider there, but everything is back up and running. So obviously, any big questions or concerns you have, feel free to go into chat. We'll be able to help you out there. But yeah, it's nice to get back into office hours. Obviously, last week had a little bit of a break with the Proven conference, but excited to kind of dive in and see what folks are thinking about.
Yeah, it was insane, which is super exciting. I don't think we really ate for the first time each day till like 4:30 in the afternoon. So it was awesome. And I think there was 900 people pre-registered. I think 600 something showed. So like huge group, which was amazing. A lot of other vendors there, which was really fun too. The one we did a few months prior, Miami Seller Conference, definitely a smaller group. I think there was like 300 people. So night and day in terms of size. But yeah, it was just incredible to see so many current users come and chat, just be like, hey, just want to say thanks, have a discussion. That was awesome. A few people, at least two that I personally talked to, were in the first 100 users of Aura, which is just
Wow.
bonkers to me. Still using us, which is amazing. So there's some legacy there. And yeah, just, being able to geek out with so many different types of sellers. I think the average seller we talked to in terms of length of time being a seller was 2.8 years. We tracked a lot. But it's anywhere from like, I have not purchased anything yet. I just created my account yesterday, which is like incredible, to I've been a seller for 10 years. So huge variety, but just the conversations you get to have with other types of sellers, other vendors, I think is something that a lot of people don't really fully understand. You definitely go for the education and what you're going to learn, but it's also that networking aspect, right? We talk a lot about how these new sellers are being far more transparent in a small group of one another than my generation of a seller, where you share nothing. I don't care how well we know each other. You can't know anything about me. And so, getting more sellers to lean into that, I think is really amazing. Really, certainly exciting. But yeah, just nonstop. I took a day or two just to recoup. I don't think I'm fully there yet, but I needed 2 nights of really solid sleep, I think, which I think I finally got last night. But no, it's been awesome. Yeah, so a little bit of a snafu this morning with our service provider on the support side. Kind of, this is just on par for being a software company, because software companies use the most other software around. So if it's not a Amazon problem, it's a AWS hosting problem. If it's not that, it's your support system is down. So it's been an eventful day for you, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Thankfully, I don't think there were too many people needing help at that time, but we should be back up and running. And yeah, I mean, you're only as good as the tools that you use, and Intercom has been
Yeah.
very great for us and is a great tool. I think it might have been a wider issue with some sort of larger services provider. I saw YouTube also had a massive outage today, so it may have been something around there. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, definitely glad we got that sorted there for sure.
Yeah. Fun times when the entire internet goes down. My internet, I'm actually on my hotspot right now because my internet's having issues. It's perfect, and then just randomly it'll shut down for like 5 seconds. But then the reconnection process is a pain in the butt. So I'm literally getting a gigabit to my phone right now via 5G, and we're porting in, which is actually kind of impressive, because if this was 3 years ago, there's no way, shape, or form this would be possible. So thanks to the technology gods for supporting us here. Um, so, coming back from Proven Conference, I kind of wanted to chat about a few things that I definitely noticed that I never really thought about. I always joke when people are like, "Oh, what's your story becoming a seller?" I always joke that I pivoted into online arbitrage and was horrible at it, which is very true. But one of the presentations, actually by one of our good partners, Jimmy Smith, was on how to build a database of, I think it was like 5,000 OA leads. And it really clicked, where I was like, oh, I've never heard it presented that way. Maybe that's just me. But the whole concept that, how do you use a leads list? A lot of people use lead lists, and they're awesome. And we've tested a lot internally at Aura here too. But what's interesting is a lot of people I find look at just what is given to them and then don't go past that. And Chris Grant talks a lot about rabbit trailing is the concept off of that list, right? So you use that as a starting point. Let's say you get 20 leads today. Awesome. Look at the 20. Maybe there's 5 you can purchase right now. They're amazing, but the others are not just as amazing. But that's not a bad thing, because now you have a starting point. Go look at the other sellers on those listings. Go reverse source, as I call it. I think rabbit trail reverse sourcing, kind of the same concept here, but go find other things from them. Go storefront stock based on the initial list of products, but then take this a step further, which is what never dawned on me, is you save these leads into a system, Airtable, Cheddarsoft, Replan dashboard, whatever you want to use, so you can circle back. Because a lot of times it's not that they're profitable now, but that they're actually a good thing in maybe 3 weeks. And so a lot of the go-to assumptions with leads lists is, yeah, they look nice now, but then 30 people jump on it and it's not, the competitive landscape has changed. Correct. But that tends to happen in the span of 2 to 4 weeks, somewhere around there. So what happens in week 6 when nobody's thinking about that SKU anymore, and it's actually very profitable? And so you're kind of pairing designing or building your own database of potential leads with what are the cycles of the brands that I'm carrying here, right? If you have, let's say you have 1,000 leads in your database, and you have, let's say 20 of those that are Nike, just for easy example here. How frequently is Nike doing discounts? Great. If you know it's once a month or every 3 months, great. Go through, check that sales coming through, go look at your database and say, what are some clear winners here that I've seen before? Maybe you can move a lot faster, because a lot of what you can't do is just go and source through the entire Nike store. Like, that's going to be so time consuming. And maybe you should do that, but for speed, you at least can just kind of connect the dots here. And I think that's something that a lot of people are talking a lot more about. It's something that I wish I had understood when I was a seller, because I think I could have crushed it with OA knowing that, and I didn't. Granted, we didn't have any kind of online arbitrage related software outside of like a book matcher, tactical arbitrage, which I could never get to work, and spreadsheets. But hey, spreadsheets work too, right? So it's interesting to see people like sellers taking more of a software based approach to how they're solving these problems, because it really is a scalable problem, and software works really well in solving these things. Could you build a system where a VA goes through each of these, or maybe you write a Python script that can go through and check how are they doing, what's happening right now? Yeah, you could do a lot of that stuff. So you can really kind of take what works well in terms of the hustle your face off mentality with OA and streamline it and scale it in a way that is actually very process and systems driven. And that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. One thing you mentioned, like it being a cycle, like
Yeah.
it is very cyclical, specific products, specific categories. We know, like we always talk about as an example, toys in Q4 are going to go way faster than toys in Q1 or 2.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of really emphasizes one thing we talk about all the time, which is using Maven so that you kind of eliminate the complexities when it comes to repricing,
Right.
and you're able to kind of let it automatically adjust based on that competitive landscape. Hey, there's a lot of sellers here that seem to be price tanking. Let me hold my price here because this is going to be best for margin and sales velocity, all those other factors. So really advantageous to be able to use that. And then, as we mentioned, it changes quickly. That 3-4 week period, maybe you adjust to a different strategy that's better, kind of go back and forth. But yeah, lead lists are very interesting. And if you're not first person to an item, then you might be the 14th or 15th person, and then it's not necessarily the best item to source. So yeah, always changing, kind of fluctuating competition and landscape on listings overall as well.
Yeah. Another kind of trend in the conversations I was having at Proven were related to AI, because there's a lot of confusion, right? It's like, okay, well, everybody says they have AI, but like, what does that mean? So you kind of have to geek out on when is the term being used correctly? When is it being used incorrectly? And unfortunately, there are a lot of sellers using tools that claim to have AI, which factually do not. And then they have a horrible experience, and they're like, hey, I love the idea of what you built here, but I'm kind of hesitant because my previous experience was so bad that it tanked everything, and I don't know if I want to do that, which is like a very understandable concern, right? And it is somewhat personally offensive to me when somebody goes through something, it's labeled as X, but it's actually Y, and it does a horrible job. And now we kind of have to do the heavy lifting on the education side to say, hey, like, I get the concern, I get the fear. This is not that. And like, being able to point people towards other sellers that use Maven to show actual examples of performance is so critical. Because I've talked to a few people that are like, I'm kind of just getting fed up with people saying AI. It's like, honestly, me too. Like, as frustrating as it is, I joke all the time. It's so frustrating because technology, when used correctly, does amazing things. We always talk about this concept of providing technical leverage, right? How do I only ask of you 0.5 units of input, but try to give you 5 or more in units of output? Like, that's technical leverage. And a lot of what's originally occurred with some of the tools claiming AI has just not been that. And it is frustrating. So let's see. I know we have a question here from Michelle. Great question here. What is the best strategy when more than 30 sellers are on a listing? Casey, you want to hit that one?
Yeah, and in general, I always ask like what your main goal is on a listing. Typically, Maven tends to be our recommendation for a majority of listings. If you don't see optimal performance in maybe a week on Maven, then you can adjust to a rules-based strategy. But generally, Michelle, what I recommend is if your main goal is profit margin, then to use Maven. It's going to take into account, avoiding price tanking, how other sellers are pricing their own products and responding to other price updates as well. So in that case, just generally knowing there's 30 sellers on a listing, knowing nothing else in that context, I would recommend Maven. But if you are maybe trying to liquidate that item or more focused on sales velocity, then I would recommend one of our rules-based strategies, typically the buy box targeting strategy. The default buy box strategy in your account when you go to build a new one that is pre-configured with our best recommendations for winning that buy box, repricing below the current winner by 2 cents, but you can also switch that to match the buy box winner as well. But that's typically my general recommendations at a high level. Sales velocity is going to be buy box targeting on the rules-based side, and then margin rather is going to be on the Maven side there.
Yeah, one thing I would like to add on to that, and I'm going to preface this by first saying, depending on how competitive each of those 30 are, because just because there's 30 doesn't mean all 30 are competing necessarily, but let's assume they are. That's where Hyperdrive, that little toggle on your listing, is really going to come into play, right? When people say, well, when should I use Hyperdrive? Well, it's whenever speed matters. Okay, well, when does speed matter? Typically, when there's a great deal of activity, and by a great deal of activity, I mean a large number of sellers that are actively changing their prices. So one thing that if you're not already doing it, I would pair Maven with Hyperdrive, and then that should do really, really well. My go-to analogy here is like, when do you want to apply Hyperdrive? A toy in Q4, perfection. So if it resembles a toy in Q4, probably a good idea. Maybe even a toy in Q3, right? That gets you kind of close too. Let's see, Scott, when I change the Aura price, the calculator goes away when I hover over it. Scott, can you clarify just a little bit more for me here? I want to make sure I understand exactly what's happening here. When I change the Aura price, the calculator goes away when I hover over it. I'm not quite sure. Let me know also what page you're on. That will help as well.
And I think, Scott, you might be referring to changing an auto-calculated min or max price to a manual min or max price. In which case we wouldn't have a calculation for any manual entered prices, whereas any auto calculated ones, we would have some sort of a breakdown based on your costs and fees. That would maybe be what would explain that initial calculator going away. But yeah, if you have any more context or clarification, feel free to pop that in there.
Yeah. That's a good point, Casey. So I did have a cool, it actually got really good traffic. I was messing around with AI. Imagine that, Dylan, with AI. And what's cool is I ran this experiment back at 2003. So when ChatGPT first came out, I think it was model 3.5. So not great, but got access to it. And I wanted to see if I could teach it how to optimize a listing for SEO. So ran everything through ChatGPT, had a ton of issues, but it was interesting. It was like, oh, cool. Like we're kind of on the cusp of something interesting here. So I took a pause and said, well, let me revisit this same experiment, same product, everything, but approach it with the modern models, tools, all that good stuff, and kind of see what happens. And so I'm going to share my screen on this. Actually, it worked really well, which I'm very, very happy to have seen happen. Let me move our banner here so we can see this. So just an updated version of what happened. But essentially, there's this whole concept of like prompt engineering, which is like, it sounds so fancy. All it is whenever you type into ChatGPT, you're technically giving it a prompt. And there are good ways to do that and bad ways to do that. I've done a lunch and learn with the Aura team on prompt engineering, best practices and stuff like that. But that's a really tough concept to get right because it's kind of time consuming. So one of the companies, Anthropic, who has their own models that compete with OpenAI, came up with this cool tool where you basically type in the base of what you need, and then it turns it into a more detailed prompt. So here's what that little, element looks like. Here's what I gave it. Nothing too crazy here. And then it turned it into this amazing prompt. Like, look at this thing. This is insane. So detailed. It's got variables in here so I can insert certain things. Really cool stuff. And then I gave it a persona, which is super interesting because there's this weird phenomenon where if you're talking to a large language model and you say, pretend you're X or you are X, it will do that, which is so weird, but it works, right? So I always like to say, hey, you're an expert in search engine optimization. Specifically, you have more than a decade of experience doing SEO for products on Amazon.com. Sounds weird, but it works. And so I gave it that. And here's what that looks like in app. Can't zoom in on this, but like, here's that little system prompt. Here's the massive prompt that it gave me. And then what's so cool is I can take this and using something like Keyword Scout, as well as a best practices guide, I literally just copied the blog post. I said, cool, here's the product title. Here's the product description. Here's the target keywords. And here's the guide, so the blog post. I hit run, and then I get a super detailed, updated product title and description. And notice this little brainstorming section. It's literally thinking through what it should do before it does that, which actually helps so much with AI. So go, okay, that's kind of cool. So we look at, the original versions of the title and the description, as well as the updated versions, and it's pretty darn good. And now this took me 15 minutes to create all of this from scratch. Now I have this prompt. I can just throw in any new product title, description, and target keywords, hit run, and then I get a much better product title and description from an SEO perspective. It's so incredible because when I was initially doing this experiment, I was feeding chunks of a blog post into ChatGPT. And for those who don't know, large language models have context, just like humans do. If I give you a ton of data, eventually you start to forget the first things I gave you, right? Large language models do the same thing. And so what's crazy is if you can increase what's called the context window. Basically, if I gave it more memory, it does better. And so this has more memory, and I'm able to, instead of feed it, paragraph by paragraph, which took hours, and then I hit my limit, which was even more annoying because you can only use it so many times. I can one shot this thing. I could just be like, here's exactly what I want. Here's what I'm going to give you. Here's what I want you to give me back. It turns that into an incredible prompt. And then I say, cool, here's all the details, go. That's so insane. And towards the end of this, I kind of, tripled down on my prediction, although I make a few tweaks to it, which is, I think that most of your agencies in the Amazon space will go away. My tweak to that prediction is that, yes, I think in a long enough time horizon, agencies as a whole concept, for the most part, outside of strategy and things like that, will go away. But in the intermediate term, I think what's going to happen is the agencies that lean on AI first will outperform those who are still doing it manually with virtual assistants, which is basically how all this works. So it just kind of proved how fast things are changing. And I mean, we're talking like a year's time and like dramatically better results. And this is just one use case, right? I'm only doing listing optimization. But think about this, right? This doesn't really apply to resellers. Resellers really don't have the time or capacity to do listing optimization because like I'm only going to be on it for like 2 weeks. Sure.
Right.
But what happens when the cost goes down to practically zero and the time it takes to do it is practically zero? And what if it's running in the background? What if we had a system where every time you jumped onto a new listing, it just scanned it, found the right best keywords, optimized it for you in real time? What if you increase your sales by 10% by just having this running in the background? That's not bad. What if it costs you $50 a month? Probably would still do that, especially for like wholesale and things like that. Like this, and then you get into this weird world where it's kind of like if everybody, if you looked out at a city, there was a bunch of public parks, and let's say they weren't maintained. If you just randomly mowed one section of it, but everybody did that automatically, it would be better as a whole, right? So what if you, Casey, jumped on and optimized a listing that I jump on 3 weeks from now, and vice versa, that occurs? Now, all of a sudden we have this amalgamation of the overall ecosystem, if you will, just got better. Now you start to get and have the question, well, what if we could increase sales on Amazon as a whole by 2% by just doing better SEO and stuff like that? It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. And just being in the Amazon space, those 1, 2, 3% improvements don't sound like a lot, but it adds up. If you do one thing that increases 2%, another thing that increases 4%, all of a sudden you're at 10, 15, 20% improvement.
Right.
And then you're going from 50K a month to 60K a month or whatever that looks like. So, yeah, I mean, those small tweaks and ChatGPT is really amazing. Someone came into chat a couple days ago saying, hey, like, I know you guys are working on a Sellerboard integration, but just so you know, I put my data from Sellerboard into ChatGPT and it formatted it for me so I can upload it into Aura in case you wanted to recommend that to any other users in the meantime.
Oh my gosh.
I thought that was really smart, thinking outside of the box for whoever that user was. Sorry, I'm blanking on that person's name. But
wow.
Yeah, I mean, just there's so many little tools available that can help, like we always say, automate or at least streamline manual tasks to free yourself up for more sourcing, more research on, data and making more intelligent decisions. So yeah, always make sure you're up to date with what is at your disposal and using it to the best of your ability.
Yeah, Michelle's excited by that. Yeah, this is what's cool, right? Like, not only does it work, you have access to it. Like, we're gone away from this is like PhD level understanding to like you could just use it. Like, OpenAI just made ChatGPT free, basically, which I'm not sure how that business model works. But like even what I did with Anthropic, like, was a little bit more like hands-on, but that's just Googling around. And honestly, I steal prompts all the time. If I find a good prompt on Twitter, I just store it in my notes because I'm like, that's wonderful. I'm not going to recreate that myself. So, you're at a point where you can take large swaths of your data, throw it into a large language model like ChatGPT, whatever, and actually have a conversation with it and ask real questions or have it do work. Like, hey, here's the formatting that it has. Here's the formatting that I need. Do it for me and give me this CSV. Perfect. You give me an idea. I was like, man, we do this mainly for users. We should have a custom GPT that basically is the Aura formatter. And we just throw it a doc, it formats it, spits it back out. We're ready to go. Like, it could handle anything. But these are the things.
Yep. Yeah, I've got a manual template that I made, and whenever people have issues with uploads, I just pull up their upload, copy and paste the columns into the one that I've done, and then I've started to send that to folks. And just so you know, anyone in chat who I may have helped with an upload, if you do go, you can download that specific upload that was successful, and then you can use that as your template moving forward. If that's helps streamline anything for anybody, just wanted to put that out there. But yeah, I think we may have I think we might be working on updates to uploads and being able to take in more native files in different formats. But
this stuff gets me really excited because it's allowing you to augment yourself really well. I really believe that it gives most people like a version of a superpower that you just previously didn't have, right? Or like it's latent power. Like, I am technical enough in the sense, like, I understand a decent amount, but I can't just sit down and code something super fast. But with ChatGPT, if I can really clarify what that thing is, I can go back and forth with it, and it can help me code something that otherwise would have taken me 4 hours, but now it takes me 30 minutes going back and forth with it. And so the things that I'm like, man, that would be really valuable, but I don't have the time to do it. Now I do have the time to do it because I just reduced it by, 3/4 or what have you. So yeah, I'm very bullish on this stuff. As you know, Casey, I think all of my lunch and learns lately have been AI related in some way, shape, or form. I think I did one on biohacking recently, which was fun. But this is just really amazing things that help you achieve more than you previously could. It's leverage at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
See, Mike jumped in here. Just wanted to jump on real quick and say anyone on the fence of joining Aura, the customer service that they provide is top notch and game changing. Thank you for that. That's amazing. I have been with it for a while and have been able to help our assist with any questions or issues I have. Yeah, we really, really, really prioritize this. Like, I know we chat about this a lot, but it does matter, right? When we had an advisor be like, hey, when we first launch, you should outsource that. It's not worth your time. It's absolutely worth my time. That is the most worth my time thing I could ever imagine. Then yeah, eventually you start to build the team out, hire people, but we're not going to the Philippines with that. It's Casey and Finn. So like, you reach out to support right this moment, it's going to be Finn because Casey's here with me, but right after it will be Casey. So we take this very seriously because it's kind of frustrating having been a seller when you just have a simple question, but you can't find a good answer and you just want to ask it. And you're just like, cool, I guess I'll send this email off and in 3 days get a response of them not actually understanding what the heck I was asking anyways. And now I got to go back and forth. So why does it take 5 days to get a simple question answered when I could just reach out to Aura support and be like, hey guys, what is this? Or how do I do X? And we're like, here's exactly how you do it. And here's exactly what that thing is. To the degree that we actually teach how to write, which it doesn't mean that Casey and Finn can't write or myself, but a lot of times it's like, here's all the details. Here's 2 paragraphs. And we intentionally train to say, great, you answered it. Now answer it in half the words and give me more value. And that's its own skill in my opinion. But Casey, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, and I think it is a balance between, I mean, there are situations where you want to provide that context. So for future
Right.
notice, like, hey, this is important to know because this may happen again in a different scenario. But for
Yep.
those questions where you're just looking for that quick answer, that quick advice, or what would you do in this situation, trying to just trim it down and make it as simple and straightforward as possible, just so that you can kind of easily take it, digest it, and apply it to whatever it may be: min and max prices, repricing strategies, workflows, uploads, all that stuff. So yeah, kind of striking that balance between quick and informative answers and providing context for new sellers who may need some advice, or hey, this is what
Yeah.
happened in this situation because seller was at X price and you were set at whatever the case may be. So I do think it's really important. I mean, there's a lot of companies that I really like and respect, and their support teams are great, but sometimes for quick answers, they'll get back 36 hours later, which is fine.
Right.
And then sometimes they'll get back 3 days later for a complex question and they'll say, hey, sorry, we've been looking into this and here's the answer, but I would rather know that you're actually looking into it. So it's little things like, hey, letting
Yeah.
you know we're taking a deeper dive into a listing or a situation, or I'll pass this over to my team to look deeper into what may be going on. So a lot of different pieces to make sure that we're keeping everybody in the loop and up to date, but also trying to get issues resolved and questions answered as quickly as possible.
Yeah, being able to be proactive with your communication, because a lot of times like we're working on something in the background, but the user doesn't know that, so they think we're just ignoring them. So we have to intentionally say, "Hey, I'm going to take 15 minutes and go look at this thing. I'll circle back with you," setting those expectations. As simple as that sounds, a lot of companies don't do that. They'll just be like, "Oh, I'll work on that, figure it out, and then I'll send you the solution." But I don't even know if you're working on it, right? I don't know if you just spent 10 hours trying to figure this out for me, or if you got it 10 hours later and you spent 5 minutes working on it. And like, that does actually matter, knowing kind of where you're at, staying in the loop on those things. Yeah, super important. See, Matt here, how will the seller board integration affect the costs for an item in Aura when there are previous FBM orders for that item? Will it average the shipping costs from seller board, or will the shipping costs be ignored? I can't give a definitive answer on that yet because we're too early on that for that decision to have been made. My guess is that we would average it, but I don't quote me on that because it we might be able to have it time of day, kind of like time of order, in which case it could be exactly what it was then, or we may average it. I gotta see. Hard to say. I wish I had a great answer for you there, but I do not. So there's a lot of things I want to chat about, because there's a lot of things that are changing for sellers, especially that I noticed in the Proven conference. Funny enough, I feel like a lot of sellers are starting to rely a lot less on virtual assistants, because software is getting to a good enough point where you're getting far. Like, if you look at the types of leverage, the forms of leverage, right? You have physical leverage. If I use a actual lever, I can lift up something much heavier than if I was just doing it with my hands. You have capital leverage, which is awesome, but that only takes you so far. You have human labor leverage, which is pretty good, but not easily scalable. And what a lot of sellers do is they rely on two main types of leverage: capital leverage, so you're going to go get credit cards, loans, whatever, or the human labor leverage for your virtual assistants. But you're getting to a point where the software is providing far more leverage. And I saw some new software, just a few things that I was like, oh, that's actually really good. I like the way they're approaching this, blah, blah, blah. And technical leverage, software, code, whatever, is dramatically better than the other two forms, because it's renewable, right? Like, I only have so much capital. I can only get so many capital, or so many dollars. I can only hire so many people. There's only so many people that are skilled enough that I can hire. And either way, that also takes cash, right? So they can kind of stack together. But with software, it's so cheap, far more reliable, and can be innovated on in real time. And so a lot of when I tell people, I'm like, hey, like, just because you're using Aura today doesn't mean that's all you're getting. You're also making a bet to what does Aura look like in the next 3, 6, 8 months. And like, you kind of have to make that bet, right? Because if you're going to get in with a company, ideally you don't want to have to change softwares that often. So you want to find one where you go, great, it's amazing now, but look at the trajectory, look at where they're going. And you're seeing a lot more sellers click with that, where they're starting to first say, what tools exist, more so than who can I hire. And who can I hire is very, very amazing. Like, don't hear me wrong here. The who, not how methodology is fantastic. But I think far too many people default to the who, not how, prior to the what can do this for me automatically. And you end up, although it seems like you're saving a ton of money because you're paying, $6, $8 an hour in the Philippines, that could be being done for pennies an hour, far more reliably, 24/7, with far less errors and issues like that. But still go hire that VA to do the more important high leveraged things. And I think that's starting to finally get into the zeitgeist, because especially in the kind of late 2010s, the Tim Ferriss effect came in, where it was like, oh, anybody can hire a virtual assistant. That's a thing, like coining the term, and outsourcing is a thing. And I remember when I read the 4-Hour Workweek, I immediately hired a VA in India for like $3 an hour. And then was like, what? I don't have a business. What am I going to have you do? Like, but it was the fact that you realized as a large group of people, you could just do that. And so we do what humans are really good at, and we overemphasized on it, and we outsourced literally everything we could. And sometimes that's great, right? But I think we are transitioning yet again into a new kind of era, which is not the outsourcing model, it is the automation model. Because even back then, yeah, you still had Zapier and Siri shortcuts and all these things, but they were still so rigid. If one variable was off, if one thing was not correct, the whole thing broke. And you spend a lot of time just trying to maintain the thing you were trying to automate. And now we're at a point where you have this non-rigid AI-based automation where it can actually reason through edge cases, things that it hasn't potentially seen. And that's pretty exciting. That opens up a lot of new doors, especially for founders. A lot of what is kind of given as advice is you should always have an executive assistant. They're going to manage your inbox and your calendar. Great. I've tried to do that. And every time I'm like, why can't software do this? But it can, and we're just not 100% there, right? Like, I've been using Howie.ai for scheduling. I literally just CC Howie on the address bar, and it reads through the whole email chain and says, great, like you guys mentioned next Tuesday, here's your availability. I checked your calendar, emails that person back and says, hey, Dylan's available between 2 and 4. What works for you? That person responds back with 3 p.m. Great. It's on our calendars. We're done. And I didn't have to be in the loop the whole time. Inbox is its own thing that I've been trying to automate for years, but that turns out a little bit more complicated, which understandable. There's far more context, but yeah, all that to say, I think more sellers are starting to think this way. And I think that's a really, really good thing. There's so much opportunity here if you can approach it from that mentality, that perspective.
Yeah.
See Kyle Wong here with GoAura. Will we be able to match price another listing just for the pricing that would reflect to another listing? Okay, so basically, can you do like ASIN to ASIN or listing to listing price changes? You can't. That's really like private label kind of price optimization. For us, we really isolate things to the listing itself because that individual listing is its own mini economy is what I call it, right? There's so many different, like one listing compared to another is always going to be apples to oranges. So we do only look at that individual listing for what we do. But for private label, it makes a ton of sense to go ASIN to ASIN where you say, cool, here's mine. And I want to compare myself to these 5 specific listings. Those are your direct competitors for that particular product line. That would make a ton of sense. There's definitely companies that do that, Prophecy, a few others, but we're more on the reseller side. See, Michelle, are you working on an app for mobile? Michelle, I'm going to do something great. We're not, but because it already exists. So you see the little icon right there. So I'm going to open this guy up. So this is a live account. Sorry, I'm using my hotspot. So you actually don't have to download the app. What's even cooler about this is you just log in on your browser, on your mobile app, go to the dashboard, hit add to screen, and there it is. It's going to perform just the same as a mobile app. It's actually optimized for it. So it's designed for mobile. So there's a few things that are slightly different, like how you get to the listing settings and things like that. There's a drawer that pops up versus off to the side. But everything you could do on your computer, you could do here, including talk with Casey and Finn and support right there. So everything you could do there. We intentionally did that because it's actually a ton of work to develop a native mobile app because traditionally it has to be its own repository of code. Well, that's actually very time consuming and creates a lot of problems. So if we add one feature to the desktop, it's going to take much longer to add it to the mobile app. The way we designed it now, if it's on the desktop, it's pretty much on mobile anyways. So that's great. So already there, if you need, we wrote basically a help desk article. If you go to help.goaura.com and search mobile, there's a doc that shows you exactly how to add it for iPhone and for Android. Roughly the same, but there's different like language things for how you do it. But yes, you can do that. And it gets me very excited. See, Mike, I have a few KPIs. I do, for example, inventory turnover ratio, excessive inventory percent, gross ROI percent, total units sold, and gross net profit. But have you guys done any studies or research on some of the more useful KPIs used by experienced sellers to help with someone's Amazon business, then input some of those on Aura dashboard? Great question. We have an announcement in a few months that will make you very happy, Mike. I will say that. That's all I can allude to. In terms of doing research on larger sellers, funny enough, this is not like an academic study. Most of your really large sellers are not as in the weeds as your smaller sellers. They pick a few KPIs and go really ham at those things. And everything else kind of works. If you think about it, like your whole Amazon business, just like in software, is one one massive math equation. Well, a lot of your individual KPIs equate to a larger KPI. That's how they're created and defined. So if you can find the right KPIs that make sense, and everybody's kind of different, that is true. You're in a position to focus on one big leverage that if you were to get that right, everything beneath it that is included also is right. Now, what's nice about that is it allows you to reverse engineer. Like, let's say your sales are kind of slow. Okay, well, sales is technically a large, high-level KPI. Well, what makes that up? And we go down and down and down, and eventually you find the singular component that is causing trouble way up here. And then what we do is we go and fix that one. So instead of looking at everything, which gets really cumbersome, you have to find the 3 to 5, no more than 5 massive KPIs that if you were to get right, everything beneath that would also have to be right. But also allow you, just like I mentioned, to understand what area of the business is really struggling. And let me go deeper and deeper and deeper until I find the exact component that's having the issues and I go and fix that issue. That's kind of how I would approach it. So a lot of your larger sellers, they look at a lot of data, but they tend to not have massive numbers of KPIs. Now, as the team grows, every person on your team should have 2 to 3 KPIs, and every team should have its own 2 to 3 KPIs. So as an example, if you have a sourcing team of 10, each individual person should have their own unique KPIs, but those KPIs should be able to correlate to the sourcing team's KPIs. Now, the sourcing team KPIs may be units sourced, could be average profit sourced, average ROI sourced, things of that nature. So you have this high level for the team, what makes sense, and then you kind of let that waterfall down to each individual person. If you want to be sourcing 10,000 units a month, great. If you have 10 people, each person needs to do 1,000 units a month. It's probably not going to be true for everyone. You're going to have some people who could do 2,000 and some who could do 500. Great. That's where you get into the individual and say, great, where are you at? Let me help you kind of scale here, but let's set goals on target that make a lot of sense. Now you can track that, right? I can create a Gecko board dashboard. Let's say I'm tracking everything using Google Sheets, using Airtable, and then I'm using Gecko board as a dashboard. I can visually see at any point in time, how is each person doing relative to their individual KPIs. There's a concept called OKRs, so objectives and key results. There's a great book, which I don't have right here with me. John Doerr wrote it. We actually use it for a little bit of time at Aura, but basically Google does this in a bunch of other tech companies, but you start with the North Star for the company and you say, great, for this year, what's our 2 to 3 goals? Great for that. For each quarter, what's our 2 to 3 goals? Great for each team for each quarter, what's our 2 to 3 goals? Great for each person. And you see how what we're doing is we're reverse engineering the outcome that we want at a high level, but down to the individual. And it doesn't matter how big your company is. You can do this even if it's just you and nobody else is involved, which I'm a big fan of doing, So it's less that they operate necessarily so differently, it's that they operate at a much larger scale. They're doing the same things, just at a much higher scale. That's the secret of going from 6 to 7 to 8. Most of the time, it's just spending more money, and it's being able to do it very efficiently and effectively. Hopefully that answered that question. But Casey, anything that you've noticed that I didn't cover that from like conversations you're having with users?
Nothing immediately comes to mind. And I would just kind of emphasize your point of like all KPIs boil down, or I guess boil up to a larger KPI, and just really identifying what that is and different ways to impact it directly. Maybe you need to change what some of those lower KPIs are. Maybe you want to change how you measure those KPIs, whatever that may be. That's a kind of a concept that I take when I think about all these different problems in my head. If there's 4 problems related to one subject, I kind of boil down like, do they connect in any way? Is there one overlying problem that boils down into these ones? So that's typically how I think about it, but no immediate specific KPIs or measurements or metrics come to mind in terms of the conversations I've been having recently.
Nice. And I actually wrote a blog post on reverse engineering because it sounds like if you're doing it like technically, it's like hacker mentality, but just for your goals, it's actually relatively straightforward. So we have a blog that I wrote a few months ago, Reverse Engineering Goals for Massive Clarity. So I basically just go into exactly how to do this. And this is the whole thing. So it's not like ridiculously long. But it'll kind of explain how you go about deciding on that North Star, that big lever goal, and then how to reverse and boil that down to a degree that makes sense. Because everybody's so different. This is the hard part about giving advice in our space. Everybody wants to say, here's the blueprint, here's exactly how you do it. And there is a lot of truth to that in terms of how to do certain things, but you have unique strengths and weaknesses like everybody else. And you also want to build most likely a very different business than somebody else. And so just because somebody can be successful doing it one way doesn't mean you can't be successful. And by the way, you define success yourself, doing it in a very different way. So I think it is important for you to understand What are you attempting to achieve first and foremost as an individual with the business? And then go and find advice that supports you achieving that end result. Because what you don't want to do is build a business you hate. That's where it sucks, where you're like, cool, I built this massive thing, I hate it, and now I can't sell it. And if I get rid of it, then like my income goes away. Like, what do I do? Like, that's a bad position to be in versus having a more thoughtful kind of approach with what is your goal here? Is it lifestyle? Okay, that's fine. Do you want to build something massive? That's awesome too. But you have to intentionally make decisions based on where you want to go. Otherwise, you're going to go somewhere else. Great question, though. Love that one. Nice. And keep the questions coming. This is awesome. Again, this is open office hours. So no agenda, no format for us here. We're just going to keep geeking. And as questions come through, we're going to jump directly into those questions. Could be questions related to repricing as a thing. Could be Aura related for the product. If you're like, hey, how do you do certain things? Or hey, I have a feature request. You have any feedback? We want to hear that as well. Or if you just want to geek on more high level stuff like we're doing right now, happy to do that as well.
What were some of the other main like topics of conversation that you ran into at the Proven conference? I know folks seem to be talking a lot about AI. Was there anything else that was top of mind for whether it's new sellers or just sellers as a whole?
Yeah. It's getting yourself out there. Funny enough, a good way to grow as a seller is to have a good network. Well, then you have to ask the question, well, how do you create a good network? Well, you have to put yourself out there. And so people think you have to want to become an influencer, and that's not necessarily true. I think just sharing your journey gives other people permission and vulnerability to share back with you. And more people are getting comfortable just sharing what they're learning in real time. And by doing so, you kind of creating a name for yourself. This doesn't mean you have to be on video or anything like that. Just literally sharing it. You don't have to be or act like you're an expert. Just here's what I learned today, or here's a mistake I made, or here's blah, blah, blah. Because you get to a point where when you do need help, you can just ask that community, that network you've built. We were talking about this with one of our partners. He was struggling with something, and we're like, why don't you just ask on Twitter? You have a huge following. Just ask. And instead of it taking 4 weeks for him to find an answer, doing it himself, somebody was like, oh, here's exactly what you do. And he got it solved in like an hour. So think about how fast you can do that. And all he's doing is sharing, hey, here's what my sales today. Here's what I learned. Here's what I'm struggling with. And people do want to hear that. People do, this can feel like a very lonely industry. But if you put yourself out there and just share that journey, other people want to follow along with that. And you get to build relationships that enable you to go faster, further. And there's something to that. And so again, this kind of goes back to my previous points about sellers being more transparent with one another, creating these kind of small groups where they're super transparent about everything. They help each other out. It's that, but in a more public environment where you're probably not sharing everything. Like, I don't think you should, but just in terms of kind of creating a mini name for yourself does actually help the business. That's not to say you want to launch a course or coaching or whatever, but it does create more opportunities. There's this whole concept of how can you manufacture luck? Well, luck is just opportunity. Well, how do you increase opportunities? Well, you need to increase what's called the surface area of opportunities. If I only know one person, that's my surface area, one person, right? So the amount of opportunities that can come to me is only through that one person. That's not much. But if I know 30 amazing people who know 1,000 also amazing people, the amount of opportunities that are possible to come to me went up exponentially. And by putting yourself out there, people are going to be willing to share things that they otherwise wouldn't have. You'll be able to gain access to really high level people that otherwise would not give you the time of day. This was the hack I used when we launched Wholesale Made Easy podcast. I was still running the wholesale business. And I was like, I want to learn a bunch of stuff. How do I get people to talk to me? Well, if I create a platform where they can talk about their thing, but I could ask them questions, does that work? Turns out it does. Because what happens when you do a podcast? Well, you have a 10 to 15 minute conversation before, 10 to 15 minute conversation after, and those are private. You get access to information that nobody else gets access to because you just built a mini relationship with that person. But now I know that person. Now, if I email them, it's not some random seller. It's Dylan from that thing I did that he helped me out and provided a ton of value. And so I can use that platform I built to leverage other people, my network, what have you. And it doesn't matter if it's a podcast, if it's a YouTube channel, if it's just Twitter or blog, it doesn't matter the medium. You pick the medium that works for you. And that alone is such a massive hack that I think not enough people are really seeing or taking advantage of. And it doesn't have to take a ton of time. Again, you don't have to be an influencer. You don't have to stand up a new YouTube channel. Just post on Twitter. Here's what I learned today. Interact with other people. Ask questions. People are dying to share their expertise with you, and you just have to give them that opportunity.
Yeah. I think that's something that we've talked about semi-frequently on these office hours is the general shift of the space from competitive to collaborative. And
Yes.
One thing that people always like to do is when they do something well, they like to tell people about it. And it's just about giving them the opportunity to do so by asking that specific question or looking for advice in a specific area. Like you said, obviously specific details will probably be avoided in a lot of those conversations, but general concepts, processes, things like that are much more shareable. I don't know if that's the proper word, but people are more likely to share that stuff these days compared to when it was prior to me joining this space. And I feel like that's been a shift generally in online communities as a whole across all industries over the last 2 or 3 years, realizing that there are so many people in our examples selling on Amazon and other examples doing different things online. And people just want to be able to share that success, whether it's their own success or recreate some version of someone else's success. So just kind of putting your questions out there and you'll more than likely get at least pointed in the right direction for the very least.
Yeah. Funny enough, a lot, Aura exists today because I had a personal blog and I was DMing everybody on Instagram to say, hey, I'm at 6 figures, trying to get to 7, trying to figure out how to do that. I'll pay you for your time. Nobody would respond. But then our co-founder, James, I messaged him and he looked me up because I had dylancarter.com and started to read the blog, even all the grammar errors. I was like, oh, cool. Like this guy's like actually thinking here, like putting pen to paper kind of thing and like trying to view it differently and solve the problems and talk about it. Like it's worth a conversation. And so even that alone makes people more willing to be like, yeah, let's talk. Let's have a conversation. Even me, like if somebody reaches out to me and I've interacted with them online, I'm willing to make the time because I'm like, yeah, like this is a cool person. I feel like I already know a little bit about you. So I think more sellers need to view this as a superpower and a skill set that anybody can build and not put so much weight on like, I have to do it right and be perceived a certain way. No, just raw, just post. People want authentic you. And I'm telling you right now, the more you do that, the more the opportunity surface area increases and the more of those opportunities come your way and you start to feel real lucky real fast. That's what we did, right? When we started VinDrive CRM initially, we built a Facebook group and I live sourced and I was not the end all be all expert. I was just like, hey, listen, it's free. I'm just going to do it. And did it for like 2-ish years every Tuesday for 2 hours. And that allowed us to meet and create a group of like-minded sellers who are then willing to beta test the first version of Aura. And that was so critical for us to get initial traction. And, the Wholesale Made Easy podcast, like that was just something where, again, I'm just going to share what I know and like kind of go from there. And, I think it cost us $100 to stand that up. It was so hacked together. And all those things, every single one of those things has dramatically increased the options for us as a company, as individuals. I mean, even what you and I are doing right here, this is increasing the surface area of opportunity for us as a company. Is these little things. And it's just little tidbits of value, right? Call it karma, whatever you want to call it. We're just value. And then the right people find that and they want to have discussions. They want to have dialogue. And that matters. I don't know. We should do a deeper dive on that because I think that's one area where I'm not natural at. Funny enough, I'm very introverted. People call me an extroverted introvert. But as I started to study how do you network, like, and that has such a weird term or stigma with it. Like, I hate to use the term, but that's what it is. But once you understand how it's actually done, you're like, oh, this actually makes a lot of sense. And it's actually not that cumbersome. It's actually not that difficult. I just need to have really great conversations with really great people and keep providing value. And that's kind of it. And then everything else kind of comes back to you tenfold. So it's fun. It's really fun.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I would emphasize the authenticity piece. I think
Yeah.
one thing like it's so easy to just only post wins, but then people think that you
Right.
never fail and it sets improper expectations. Being a big sports guy, I always thought highlight reels were great, but I always like to watch not lowlights, but like when things aren't going well, how do players, teams, coaches respond? And I think it's
Right.
important to share those because when the pressure's on, the sports example spotlight's the brightest. Like, how do you show up? It's easy to
Yeah.
only post your makes, not your misses. So I think
Yeah.
being authentic, being like, hey guys, I did this. It didn't work very well. If anyone's got any ideas, then they know,
Yeah.
hey, they already tried that. Let's try a different angle. And it
Mhm.
just kind of opens up the conversation in a more honest
Yeah.
and genuine way. So,
But also, what did you learn from that failure? Because now your failure becomes an opportunity for the next person. You get to provide value to them for free.
mhm.
And like the fact that you are vulnerable and authentic means that it's easier for people to build that relationship with you because they're like, oh, cool. Like, you've already let the curtain down, so to speak. You've already opened up the floodgates for me. That's why, like, I mean, I can in Proven, I had people come up and be like, Dylan. I was like, yeah, they're like, whole life story and like this thing. We can skip the pleasantries. And they're like, I feel like I already have a relationship with you because I've heard you speak so often. And so we get to skip that aspect and go deeper, faster.
Mhm.
And there's something to that that's really cool.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting. You feel like I may have just met you in person, but we feel like we've known each other for half a decade, if not a full decade, and we can just click so easily. There's something about that I think is really undervalued for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know
It's
we're
kind of,
wrapping up here on time. So I want to make sure we get all the questions answered. So if anybody has any additional questions, again, we can take this anywhere you guys want. No format here. And thank you for everybody for joining us. This has been fun. I know we kind of getting a little meta on you a little bit, but that's kind of our foray. We kind of dig that. I feel like more people should do that. It's let's have the discussions that a lot of people are not. But yeah, please post any questions you have, any feedback you have for us. Would love to dive deep into anything before we wrap up here for time.
yeah. Yeah. It reminds me, I forget the exact quote now, of course, but the Thomas Edison quote. Why did you keep going after failing so many times? I didn't fail 150 times. I found 150 times to not, or 150 ways to not make a light bulb.
Exactly.
A lot easier, a lot harder for him to, network and things back pre-internet, but he got the job.
A lot of letters.
Yeah.
A lot of pigeons, a lot of letter writing. I wish letter writing was still a thing. Kind of fun. Awesome. Cool. Matt, Michelle, happy you guys got some value from this. Really exciting for us. Awesome. So we're going to end it there. Again, we do this every Wednesday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. EST, live office hours, no format. We jump in, Casey and I. We kind of open up with some kind of thing that's top of mind for us, but dive deep into whatever questions, things you have for us. But we appreciate everybody coming here. It's been amazing for us. We love doing this every single week. Invite your friends, reshare it for us. The more people we can get in here, the more we can increase the surface area of amazing conversations and questions that you may need the answer to and you don't even realize it. So definitely help us share it. See, I can make it full circle too. It's good stuff. Awesome. So with that, we will let you guys get back to the rest of your week. Casey, have a good one, man.
See you next week.